My dad decided to mentor my school bully, the same guy who spent 6 years turning my locker into a trash can and my name into a punchline, and he announced it while passing him the potatoes. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and betrayal. I stood there, fingers still numb from gripping the doorframe, watching my father nod approvingly as if the boy across from him hadn't once pinned me to asphalt while a crowd counted down like it was New Year's Eve. The bully laughed at something Dad said. Not a nervous laugh. Comfortable. Practiced. Like he already belonged here. When I didn't sit, Dad glanced up, irritation tightening his mouth. Don't be spiteful, he said, voice calm, the same tone he used when correcting table manners. Spiteful. The word landed harder than any shove that kid ever gave me. And that's when I understood this wasn't forgiveness. It was replacement. I've always been the quiet one in my family, the child who learned early that silence earns fewer sighs. My older brother was the athlete, my younger sister the miracle baby. I was the space between their applause. Dad used to call me low maintenance, which sounded like praise until I realized it really meant forgettable. I became good at shrinking, shoulders in, voice soft, needs folded small enough to fit in my pocket. School was worse. The boy now laughing at our table built his reputation on my hesitation. He knew I wouldn't swing back, wouldn't shout, wouldn't tell. Every hallway humiliation taught him the same lesson my house had already taught me. I was safe to overlook. Teachers forgot my name. Classmates borrowed my notes and forgot to return them. Even my victories, perfect grades, art contests, scholarships, landed quietly like envelopes slid under a closed door. I told myself invisibility was armor. If no one really saw me, no one could hurt me. But invisibility has a cost. People start rewriting your story without asking, casting you as background in scenes that should have been yours. So when Dad looked at him with pride instead of me, it didn't feel new. It felt familiar. Dinner didn't explode. It thinned. Dad kept refilling his glass before it was empty, leaning toward him in that attentive way he used to reserve for my report cards. Drive, he said, impressed, like the word itself deserved applause. The boy nodded modestly, eyes lowered, but I caught the corner of his mouth lifting, just slightly, whenever Dad looked down at his plate. When I tried to speak, Dad's hand lifted, not harsh, just efficient. Let him finish. The same gesture he used on telemarketers and waiters. The boy told a story about messing up in school back then, vague enough to sound honest, careful enough to leave out names. Dad chuckled softly, the sound of a man forgiving a stranger. We all make mistakes at that age. I watched the steam curl off my food until it disappeared. No one noticed I hadn't taken a bite. Later, while clearing dishes, Dad said, "It would mean a lot if you showed some maturity." His tone was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. Behind him, the boy stood in the hallway, hands in pockets, studying the family photos like he was measuring wall space. He didn't look guilty. He looked patient. The moment didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived with a photograph. Dad was showing him the framed pictures along the hallway, the curated timeline of our family's pride. Soccer trophies. Dance recitals. Graduation smiles. When they reached mine, Dad paused, then gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. This one was always more sensitive, he said, like he was explaining a cracked dish he couldn't bring himself to throw away. The boy tilted his head, studying my photo. I watched his eyes sharpen with recognition, the way a lock clicks open when the right key slides in. He knew exactly who I was. And he knew Dad didn't. Something inside me settled, not snapped, not flared. Settled. Like dust deciding where it belongs. I realized then that nothing happening in that hallway was accidental. Dad wasn't rescuing a troubled kid, he was auditioning a replacement. Someone confident. Impressive. Loud enough to be seen. And the boy wasn't surprised to find himself welcomed. He'd always believed he deserved front row seats. So I stopped waiting for Dad to notice the truth. If he wanted a new version of me, fine. I decided he could have one. Just not the one he expected. I didn't confront anyone. Confrontation is loud, and loud people get interrupted. Instead, I made lists. First, logistics. I gathered my documents the way archivists handle rare paper: birth certificate, transcripts, scholarship letters, bank statements. I already had a separate account from freelance design work, a habit I'd built quietly after learning how easily family help could become family access. I changed passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and redirected my mail to a campus P.O. box I'd opened months earlier but never used. Preparation, I'd learned, looks a lot like paranoia until it looks like foresight. Second, leverage. I emailed my department advisor and confirmed my eligibility for the early research placement I'd once declined because Dad said staying close to home was practical. The slot was still open. The stipend covered housing. The acceptance form required only a signature. Third, narrative. I drafted a single message to my father, short, neutral, unaccusing. No emotion for him to argue with, no blame for him to deflect. Just information. By midnight, my suitcase was packed, my ride scheduled, my future signed. Down the hall, I could hear them laughing together. For the first time, it sounded distant. I left before sunrise when the house was still holding its breath. The kitchen clock glowed 5:12 a.m., its faint ticking louder than footsteps. I set my key on the table beside Dad's coffee mug, aligning it with the handle the way he always did. Next to it, I placed the envelope, creased once deliberately so he'd have to smooth it out to read. No dramatic note. Just a printed line: I accepted the research post. Housing's covered. Don't worry about me. My suitcase wheels made almost no sound on the tile. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting, the sky a dull blue waiting for light. The rideshare pulled up right on time, headlights washing over the front windows. For a second, I saw my reflection in the glass, still, composed, unhurried. As the car eased away, the porch light flicked on. Through the windshield, I caught a glimpse of Dad's silhouette in the doorway. Letter in hand, posture uncertain, like a man who just realized a chair he leaned on wasn't there anymore. I didn't wave. By the time the sun rose, the house was already behind me, shrinking quietly into something small enough to forget. Dad didn't call right away. That was the first consequence, the silence stretching long enough to prove he'd expected me to come back on my own. When his name finally lit my screen that evening, I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. His voice sounded careful, like he was stepping across thin ice. He said he'd read my note. Said he wished I'd handled it differently. He didn't ask where I was. He didn't mention the boy. He just kept clearing his throat between sentences, as if the words he wanted were stuck somewhere pride couldn't swallow. Relatives began texting polite confusion. Your dad says you left suddenly. Friends from home sent question marks. No one accused me of anything outright, they didn't need to. Reputation rarely collapses with a crash. It tilts subtly until everyone adjusts their footing and pretends the floor was always slanted. But something unexpected happened on my side of that distance. I slept. Deep, unguarded sleep, the kind that doesn't listen for footsteps in the hall. For the first time, my worth wasn't being measured against someone louder. And that's why this matters, because sometimes the quietest revenge isn't making them feel small. It's realizing you were never small at all. Weeks passed, and the world didn't collapse without me in that house. It expanded. My new apartment smelled like fresh paint and unfamiliar possibility. The windows faced east, and every morning sunlight spilled across my desk like a quiet congratulations. At the research lab, people listened when I spoke. Not indulgently, not impatiently, just attentively, as if my thoughts had weight. I wasn't louder than before. I was simply no longer shrinking. Dad calls more often now. His voice has lost its easy certainty, replaced by pauses that sound almost like questions. He tells me small updates about home, careful, neutral ones, as if he's learned that access to me is something earned, not assumed. I answer kindly. Distance, I've discovered, can be compassionate when it's chosen. I don't ask about the boy. I don't need to. Whatever story they're telling each other no longer includes me, and that's not a wound anymore, it's a boundary. I used to think justice meant being seen. Now I know peace means seeing yourself. And the quiet life I built without permission is the loudest proof I ever existed.